In this episode, we are focusing on one of the most important habits a real analyst can develop, because finding a scanner result is only the beginning of understanding whether a security problem truly exists. Vulnerability scanners are incredibly useful for showing where weakness may be present, but they do not produce perfect truth on demand, and a strong defender learns very quickly that a finding on a report is a signal that needs examination rather than a conclusion that should be accepted blindly. Validating scanner results means taking what the tool reported and determining whether the weakness is actually present, whether it matters in the way the report suggests, and whether the surrounding environment changes the practical urgency of the issue. For a brand new learner, the easiest way to think about validation is that it turns raw scanner output into trustworthy security knowledge. Without that step, teams can waste time chasing problems that are not real, overlook weaknesses that are real but poorly described, and make remediation decisions based on noise instead of evidence. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Validation is necessary because scanners work by comparing observed conditions to known patterns of weakness, and pattern matching is powerful but never perfect. A tool might identify a service version and associate it with a vulnerability, infer a risky condition from a response banner, or report a missing patch based on information gathered from a host. Yet each of those detections depends on the quality of the evidence collected and the logic used to interpret it. If the evidence is incomplete, outdated, or unusual, the finding may be wrong, only partly correct, or more complicated than the report makes it appear. That does not make the scanner unreliable or unimportant. It simply means the scanner is doing what it was designed to do, which is surface likely weakness at scale so analysts can investigate intelligently. Good validation begins with that mindset, because once you stop treating the report as a final verdict, you become much better at distinguishing meaningful security problems from automated guesswork. One of the biggest reasons validation matters is the false positive, which is a reported issue that either does not exist or does not exist in the dangerous way the tool suggests. This happens for many reasons in real environments. A service banner may advertise an old version even though the underlying software has already been fixed. A configuration may look weak from the outside even though another control is blocking exploitation. Or a scanner may misread a response pattern that resembles a known vulnerability but is actually harmless under the conditions being tested. False positives are more than a technical inconvenience. They waste analyst attention, frustrate system owners, create unnecessary urgency, and can gradually erode trust in the security team if people feel they are being asked to fix things that are not truly broken. That is why validation is not a luxury added after the important work is done. It is part of the important work, because a security program becomes much more credible when its findings are supported by careful confirmation instead of blind acceptance. Validation also matters because the opposite problem exists too, and that problem is the false negative. A clean or incomplete scan result can create the illusion that the environment is safer than it really is if the tool failed to see a weakness that is actually present. This can happen when the scanner could not reach the target fully, lacked the necessary credentials, misunderstood the service, or missed a condition that only appears under certain runtime or application states. For a beginner, this is an important lesson because it means validation is not only about disproving bad findings. It is also about asking whether the result set makes sense and whether important blind spots may still exist. If a critical system returns surprisingly little information, if an application is complex and dynamic, or if the scan location provided only a narrow view of the environment, the analyst should not confuse limited visibility with the absence of risk. Strong validation, therefore, includes skepticism in both directions, questioning not just what the tool says is present, but also what the tool may have failed to reveal. A practical way to understand validation is to see it as a process of comparing the scanner's claim with independent evidence. If the scanner says a service is vulnerable, the analyst wants to know what facts support that claim beyond the scanner's own summary line. Does the software version really match the affected condition? Does the configuration actually allow the insecure behavior? And does the surrounding environment make the weakness reachable in a meaningful way? The more important the finding, the more important it becomes to gather stronger evidence before acting as though the problem is fully understood. This does not always require dramatic testing or deep specialist work. Sometimes validation is as simple as reviewing the version information directly, checking a patch record, confirming a setting on the target, or comparing the finding against system documentation and known environmental controls. The key point is that validation asks the analyst to move from tool output to underlying fact, because facts are what make remediation discussions clear and defensible. Context is one of the most important parts of validating any scanner result, because the same technical condition can mean very different things in different environments. A vulnerability on a public-facing server that supports critical business functions may deserve immediate concern, while the same vulnerability on an isolated testing system with no sensitive data may require a different level of urgency, even if the technical weakness itself is identical. Validation, therefore, is not just about proving whether the weakness exists. It is also about understanding where the affected system sits, who can reach it, what it does for the business, what other controls surround it, and how much harm compromise could cause. This matters because security decisions are never made in a vacuum. An analyst who validates only the technical existence of a flaw but ignores exposure, asset value, and business consequence is still missing part of the truth. Good validation turns a scanner result into a realistic risk picture, not just a technically corrected sentence in a report. Another major part of validation is understanding how the scanner gathered its evidence in the first place. A non-credentialed scan, for example, may be relying heavily on network responses, banners, and observable behavior from outside the system, which means the findings may reflect exposure well, but may also contain more inference. A credentialed scan may inspect patch levels, installed software, services, and configuration details from inside the host, which often improves accuracy, but still depends on permission level, collection method, and the consistency of system records. If analysts do not consider how the evidence was collected, they may overestimate or underestimate the reliability of the finding. A version guess based on an external response should usually be treated differently from a result drawn from internal package data or a directly observed configuration value. This is why mature analysts do not read all findings the same way. They think about the source of the evidence, the confidence level attached to that source, and how much more verification is needed before the issue should drive action. Logs and other system records often play a valuable role in validation because they help explain what actually happened during the scan or during related testing. If a scanner suggests that a web application accepted unsafe input, server logs, application logs, and backend processing records may show whether the request really reached the vulnerable function, whether it was blocked, whether it generated an error, or whether it caused an internal action that supports the scanner's concern. If a host-level finding suggests a missing patch or insecure service, system records may confirm installation status, service behavior, or recent configuration changes that shaped the result. This is one reason validation often feels more like investigation than simple confirmation. The scanner points to a possible weakness, but the logs help tell the story of what the system actually did. For new learners, this is a useful habit to build early, because many security problems become much clearer when you stop looking only at the report and start looking at the evidence generated by the target itself. Reproducibility is another critical concept in validating scanner results. If a scanner reports a weakness once, the analyst should want to know whether the condition can be observed again under similar circumstances or whether the initial finding depended on something temporary, partial, or misleading. A repeatable result is usually easier to trust and easier to explain to the people who need to fix it. If the issue cannot be reproduced, that does not always mean it was false, but it does mean the analyst needs to be more careful about how strongly the finding is presented and what kind of urgency is attached to it. Reproducibility also helps separate fragile edge cases from stable security conditions that are likely to remain present until a real change is made. For a beginner, this matters because organizations act on findings they believe are durable and meaningful. A clear, repeated observation gives the team far more confidence than a single strange signal with no supporting pattern behind it. Validation also helps analysts distinguish between vulnerability existence and vulnerability exposure, and that distinction is more important than many new students first realize. A weakness may be present on a system in a strict technical sense, but if the related service is disabled, isolated, or unreachable from any realistic threat path, then the practical urgency may differ from what the raw scanner result implies. This does not mean the findings should be ignored automatically, because dormant or shielded weaknesses can become more serious later if the environment changes. It does mean that the analyst should avoid speaking as though every confirmed technical weakness is equally exploitable under current conditions. Good validation therefore asks several connected questions. Is the weakness real? Is the vulnerable component active? Who can reach it? And what barriers stand between the condition and actual misuse? Those questions help the organization prioritize more intelligently, because security work becomes much more effective when it distinguishes between theoretical presence and practical opportunity. Compensating controls are another major part of validation because they shape whether a scanner result translates into immediate operational risk. A reported weakness may exist on a system, but strong segmentation, restricted access, application controls, monitoring, or hardened deployment practices may reduce the likelihood that the weakness can be abused in a meaningful way. This does not erase the underlying problem, and analysts should be careful not to use compensating controls as an excuse for permanent neglect. At the same time, ignoring those controls would create an exaggerated risk picture that may push the organization toward the wrong remediation sequence. Validation helps bring balance by confirming not just the flaw, but also the defenses that surround it. For a beginner, this is a very practical lesson because real environments are messy and layered. Security decisions often depend on understanding how weaknesses and protections coexist, rather than pretending the environment is either completely broken or completely safe. Communication improves dramatically when scanner results have been validated well. Developers, administrators, managers, and system owners are much more likely to take action when the analyst can explain what the scanner reported, what evidence confirmed the issue, what conditions limit or increase the danger, and why the finding matters in the specific environment being discussed. A vague statement that a tool found a critical vulnerability is often less useful than a clear explanation that the affected service is exposed to a sensitive network path. The software version was confirmed directly. The risky behavior was observed consistently, and segmentation controls only partially reduce the threat. Validation gives analysts that explanatory depth. It transforms a noisy technical result into a grounded narrative that other teams can understand and act on. This is one reason strong validation makes the whole vulnerability management program healthier. The goal is not only to be technically correct, but also to be clear enough that the right people can respond confidently and efficiently. Documentation is closely tied to validation because once a finding has been examined, the organization needs a reliable record of what was confirmed, what remained uncertain, and what evidence supported the final conclusion. If the analyst validated the software version, identified the affected configuration, confirmed exposure from a certain segment, or determined that a result was a false positive, those facts should be captured clearly so future analysts, auditors, and system owners do not have to rediscover the same truth from scratch. Good documentation also helps the team spot patterns over time. If the same class of false positives appears repeatedly, it may reveal a tuning issue in the scanner or a common environmental behavior that needs better interpretation. If the same type of confirmed weakness keeps returning, it may point to deeper process problems in deployment, patching, or configuration management. Validation without documentation helps only in the moment, while validation with documentation strengthens the program over the long term by turning one investigation into reusable knowledge. The most mature way to think about scanner validation is as a discipline that protects the organization from both overreaction and underreaction. Without validation, security teams may overreact to noisy or misleading findings, wasting effort and credibility. Without validation, they may also underreact to real weaknesses because they misunderstand the technical conditions, trust a false sense of safety, or fail to notice that the scan results do not match the importance of the affected asset. A strong analyst uses validation to create balance between those extremes by checking facts, considering context, comparing sources of evidence, and communicating clearly about what is known and what still needs investigation. That mindset matters because vulnerability management is not a contest to produce the longest report. It is a process of turning imperfect technical signals into sound decisions that reduce real risk across the organization. The big takeaway is that validating scanner results is what turns automated detection into reliable security understanding. A scanner is excellent at surfacing possible weaknesses across large environments, but its output becomes truly useful only when an analyst confirms the underlying facts, considers exposure and business context, checks for false positives and false negatives, and documents what the evidence actually shows. Validation helps teams trust the right findings, challenge the wrong ones, prioritize more intelligently, and communicate with far more precision than raw reports alone would ever allow. Once you understand that, you begin to see why strong vulnerability analysts are not just people who run tools. They are people who investigate what the tools report and turn those reports into decisions the organization can defend and act on with confidence. That is the habit you want to carry forward, because in real security work, accuracy matters just as much as discovery.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.